My name is Miss Jones. I teach elementary school math, and welcome to my channel, Miss Math Jones. Today we're going to be working on our third grade Eureka Module 5, Lesson 17 homework. The objective for our homework is to place whole number fractions and fractions between whole numbers on the number line. Sounds like a lot, but once you get going, it's pretty easy. So let's get started. All right, let's take a look at number one. Number one says estimate to equally partition and label the fractions on the number line. Label the wholes as fractions and box them. The first one is done for you. Now, we do see letter A, and letter A is in thirds, and you see that it's counting by thirds, but the last lesson that we completed was lesson 15, and we started with 0 at the beginning of our number line. So we knew that we would start with 0 thirds, right? But this number line doesn't start that way. So I want you to, if you can, get a sheet of paper, an extra sheet of paper, or you can do it where I do it on here. And I'm going to show you on letter B how you can figure out where to start those number lines, okay? Because the number line isn't starting with a 0 or a 1. For letter B, it starts with 2, the whole number 2, and we got to figure out how we get to that 2. So let's figure out how to get to that 2, all right? So let's get ready. Now, you can do this on scratch paper, or I'm going to use a little section above it, and you'll see what I'm talking about when we get going. All right, so we're looking at letter B. We're going to number this number line, all right? We're going to number it. We're going to label it. It's going to be eighths. So let's start with 0 eighths. We're going to write 0 eighths. All right. So that's if it was starting at 0, which is not. We got to get to 2. So let's see. We have 1/8, okay? 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, 8/8. And I really want you to write this down on your paper. If you're using scratch paper, write it down on your scratch paper. If you're writing it down where I'm writing it, that's fine. Just make sure you write it neatly and box it in, because I really want you to see this. We wrote our numbers from 0/8 to 8/8, right? And we know that 8/8 is the same as saying 1 whole. So right above it, right, above your 0/8, I want you to write the number 0. And above your 8/8, I want you to write the number 1. Because what you've done is just created a mini number line counting by eighths. So we've gone from 0 to 1. Now, if you look at the number line on our paper, for letter B, it starts with 2. So we have to figure out how many eighths is equal to 2 wholes. I know that 8/8 is 1 whole, right? But how many eighths are equal to 2 wholes? All right, now make sure, before we go any further, that you have a little mini number line. We've created a little mini number line, a little fraction strip here on your paper, just like I have on my screen. It's very important because you need to learn how to list these fractions out so that you can tell how many eighths or how many fractions in general are in a whole. This will help you. All right, so we started counting at 8, or stopped counting at 8/8. I'm sorry, we stopped counting at 8/8, but we're going to keep counting, right, by eighths so we can figure out how many eighths are in 2 wholes. So let's keep going. So we have 9/8, 10/8. I'm going to write it and box it in. 11/8, 12/8, 13/8, 14/8, 15/8, 16/8. Now you might be saying, well, Miss Jones, how do I know when to stop, right? Well, we're counting by eighths. So how many parts should be in a whole? How many parts make up a whole when we're counting by eighths? Eighths. 8. And notice we have 8 squares written. 9/8, 10/8, 11/8, 12/8, 13/8, 14/8, 15/8, 16/8. That's 8 squares, which means we've made another whole. See that? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that means that 16/8 is the same as 2 wholes. So I'm going to write 16/8 in this big square above 2, the number 2, because 16/8 is equal to or the same as 2 wholes. And if it was a division problem, right, you can basically check your math with division because 16 divided by 8 is 2. And fractions are division. Now they want us to finish labeling our number line. And we have to partition it, right? So we have to draw little lines there. And we're counting by eighths. So you need 8 lines. So it's basically the last line is your next whole number. And I'll show you what I mean. So let's start drawing lines. We need 8 lines. So watch this. All right, we have 16/8 there. It's 1 line, 2 lines, 3 lines, 4 lines, 5 lines, 6 lines, 7 lines. The 8th line is when you get to your next whole because 8 parts, 8 eighths to equal 1 whole, right? So that last line, that's how you know that you've reached your next whole number. All right, now let's start labeling these lines, right? Okay, so we already have 16/8 labeled. So when we're counting, the next number would be 17 or 17/8. What number comes after 17 when you're counting? That's right, 18. So next on that number line, that next line would be 18/8. And what comes after 18 when you're counting? That's correct, 19. So it would be 19/8. What's after 19? Good, 20. So under that next line would be 28. Now, as you're writing and labeling, right, your number line, make sure that you're boxing in those fractions so the numbers don't get all jumbled up and weird. Okay? So we're at 28. And if you're counting, what number comes after 20? That's right, 21. 21/8. Okay? After 21, what would be next? Good. 22. After 22, what would be next? Perfect. 23/8. After 23/8, what would be next? Perfect. That's right. 24. 24/8. All right. So now we've correctly labeled our number line of eighths. And there's still that big box above the 3. Well, we know that 24/8 is equal to 3 wholes because if we did the math, right, and we treated it as a division equation, then 24 divided by 8 would be 3. So that means the fraction that goes in that box above 3 whole is 24/8. All right, now you may want to go ahead and pause your video to make sure that you have everything written on your paper that I have on my screen. Go ahead and do so now. All right, let's take a look at letter C. Letter C wants us to partition this number line into fourths. All right, now they have the wholes already labeled. 2, 3, 4. So we're not starting at 0. We're not starting at 1. We're starting at the whole number 2. All right, so we're going to do the same thing. Partition it into fourths, which means we need 4 lines. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. And notice that fourth line means that we're on a whole number. Okay? Let's do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4. That fourth line means we're on the next whole number. And that works because we're counting by fourths. If it was fifths, then it would be, the fifth line would be the whole number, okay? But the whole number happens every fourth line because we're counting by fourths. Okay. Now, let's take a look at how we get to 2, okay? So we're going to start with 0. We're going to make a mini number line like we did on letter B, just so that we can count from 0 fourths until we get to the amount of fourths that gives us 2 wholes. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. 0 fourths. I want you to write 0 fourths and box it in. 1/4, 2 fourths, and 3 fourths, then 4 fourths. Now, 4 fourths is the same as 1 whole. But our number line does not start with the number 1. It starts with the number 2. Okay, 2 wholes. So we need to keep going. All right, so we stopped at 4 fourths. Let's keep counting up. So we have 5 fourths. Remember, you're writing your fractions, boxing them in because we're making one long fraction strip, just so that we can see where our whole numbers are. Okay, then 6 fourths. 6 fourths would be 7 fourths. After 7 fourths would be 8 fourths. Now I'm going to stop here because I know I have 4 parts now. Okay, 4 fourths make 1 whole. So since I have 4 more fractions, 4 more boxes, then that means I'm at my next whole number. So 8 fourths is the same as 2 whole. And I can check that with division because you always can check your fractions with division. 8 divided by 4 is 2. So I know I'm correct. So that means that this number line starting at 2 wholes means that that fraction is actually 8 fourths. If I write it in fourths, it's 8 fourths. 2 wholes is the same as 8 fourths. Now, I can finish labeling the rest of my number line. So I start with 8 fourths. Next would be 9 fourths, and we box it in. After 9 fourths, we would have, that's right, 10 fourths, and we box it in. After 10 fourths, what would be next? That's right, 11 fourths. After 11 fourths, what would be next? That's correct, 12 fourths. Now, I'm at a whole number, and I want to make sure to check it so I can check my whole number with division. What's 12 divided by 4? Well, if you said 3, you're absolutely correct. So I know that I'm labeling my number line correctly. Now, after 12 fourths would be 13 fourths. After 13 fourths would be what? That's right, 14 fourths. After 14 fourths would be what? That's right, 15 fourths. And the last fraction on our number line would be 16 fourths. And I can check it to make sure that 16 fourths is the same as 4 wholes, because 16 divided by 4 is 4. So that means that I've labeled my number line correctly. Now, if you need to pause your video to make sure that you've labeled everything correctly, go ahead and do so now. Now let's draw a little squiggly line, right? And I want to just separate letter C from letter D. All right, so draw your little squiggly line. And letter D wants us to partition our number line into halves. Halves. Well, this is going to be easy. Halves. Because with halves, right, the denominator is a 2. So to create a number line, then you need to partition it into basically 2 lines, right? And every 2 lines would be a whole number. Every 2 lines would be a whole number. When we're counting by fourths, every 4 lines was a whole number. But since we're counting by halves and the denominator of the bottom number is a 2, then that means every 2 lines is a whole number. All right? Now, let's go ahead and partition it. So 1, 2. I made that line longer because that's a whole number. Let's do it again. 1, 2. All right, so make sure your lines look like my lines. All right, and every time you have a whole number, I just make those lines a little longer because I know that right there I'm going to put a whole number. All right, now this one starts with 3. Okay, starts with 3. How do we figure that out? How do we figure that out? Starts with 3. How do we figure out without writing our fractions from 0 halves all the way up until we get to 3? How do we figure that out? Well, I'll show you how to figure that out. Okay, so let's start off just by numbering because we're just starting out. So we're going to number from 0 halves, and we're just going to keep going until we get to the fraction that's the same as 3. But eventually I'm going to show you how to figure it out without counting all the way from 0. But since we're just starting out, let's just write our numbers or our fractions in order, starting at 0. So first we have 0 halves. Box it in. We have 1 half. 2 halves. So 2 halves equal 1 whole. Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, well, Ms. Jones, there are 3 boxes, right? And you said that if the bottom number is a 2, then every 2 boxes should be a whole number. Well, it is because we don't count 0. 0 is just our starting point. That's not the first box. The first box is the one with the number 1 in it, the 1 half. 1 half, 2 halves. That's 2 boxes. So every 2 boxes, that's a whole number, right? So let's start with 2 halves and keep counting up. So next we have 3 halves, 4 halves. That's 2 boxes. Every 2 boxes is a whole number because we're counting by halves. So that means that 4 halves is the same as 2 wholes. All right, but our number line starts with 3, so I have to keep going. So I'm going to start with 4 halves, right? And count up. 5 halves, 6 halves. Well, that's 2 more boxes. Okay, we're counting by halves. The denominator is a 2, so that means every 2 boxes is a whole number. So that means we're finally at 3 wholes. 6 halves is the same thing as 3 wholes. Okay, and I can check that with division because 6 divided by 2 is 3. So that means when I go to label my number line under letter D, then underneath the number 3, I'm going to write 6 halves because 6 halves is equivalent or the same as or equal to 3 wholes. So I'm going to label my number line. I'm going to write a fraction under each line that we already created. So we start with 6 halves. Next on our number line would be 7 halves. After 7 halves would be 8 halves. Well, that's 2 boxes, and the 2 is our denominator, which means at 8 halves, that is a whole number right there. The number 4. It should be 4 because 8 divided by 2 is 4. So we're at 8 halves, but we're not finished. We need to finish labeling our number line. So after 8, while we're counting, the next number would be 9 halves. Then after 9 halves would be 10 halves. Well, that's 2 boxes, and our denominators are 2, which means this is my next whole number. And see, it's already labeled. 10 halves is the same as 5 wholes. And I can check that with division. You can always check whole numbers with division. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So that means that we've labeled this number line correctly. Okay, now you may want to pause your video so that you can make sure that everything for letter D is written correctly. Let's go ahead and draw a little squiggly line so we can separate D from E. And E wants us to label our number line and partition it by fifths. Okay, so we're partitioning by fifths and counting by fifths. So that means that there's going to be a whole number every fifth line. Let's go ahead and start partitioning or dividing our number line. So every 5 lines is a whole number. So let's start. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. See how I made that one longer? That's a whole number. That's going to be the whole number 7. And I keep going because I have to get to 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That line is longer because that's going to be the whole number 8. We keep going because we have to get to 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's the whole number 9. All right, so now we've partitioned our number line correctly into fifths. And take a look. This number line starts with the number 6. Now remember I told you I was going to show you a shortcut for how to figure out what fraction to start your number line with when you start with a whole number that's not a 0 or a 1 or a 2. Okay, so we're counting by fifths, right? We're counting by fifths. But this starts with the whole number 6. So watch this. What number divided by fifths or divided by 5 would give you the whole number 6? What number divided by fifths or 5 would equal the whole number 6? Well, let's think about the fact family, right? I can write this as a multiplication problem. So instead of the unknown number divided by 5 equals 6, that's the same thing as saying 6 times 5 equals 30. So that means that number that goes where that question mark is would be 30. So the whole number 6 is the same thing as 30 divided by 5, or 30 fifths. And to finish labeling our number line, we just count up. So 31 fifths, and box it in. The next fraction will be 32 fifths, and we box it in. The next fraction after that would be 33 fifths, and we box it in. And we keep counting. 34 fifths, then 35 fifths. And remember, we said that long line was the number 7. And we can check our math with division, right? 35 divided by 5 is what? Right, it's 7. So 35 fifths is equal to 7 wholes. All right, let's keep counting up. 36 fifths, 37 fifths, 38 fifths, 39 fifths, 40 fifths. Now that's a long line we put there, which means that's the whole number 8, as we said when we were partitioning our number line. And we can make sure to check our math to make sure that is the number 8, right? Because 40 divided by 5 is what? 8. So 40 fifths is the same thing as saying 8 wholes. Now let's keep counting up. 41 fifths, 42 fifths, 43 fifths, 44 fifths, 45 fifths. And just to make sure that it's correct, we check it with the division. 45 divided by 5 is 9. So that means that we've labeled our number line of fifths correctly. Now, you may want to go ahead and pause your video to make sure that you have everything written down that I have on my screen. Let's take a look at number 2. Number 2 says partition each whole into 6. Label each fraction. Count up as you go. Box the fractions that are located at the same points as whole numbers. Now, this fraction, or this number line for fractions, starts at the whole number 3, which means we're going to have to use that formula that I showed you on our last question for number 1 to figure out the fraction that we have to start with. But first, let's partition our number line into sixths. So that means that every 6th line is a whole number. So let's go ahead and start. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Remember, every 6 lines is a whole number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. Now, we've correctly partitioned our number line into sixths. Now we have to figure out what fraction to start our number line with, being that our number line starts with 3 whole. That's the number 3 whole. That's a whole number. It's not a fraction. It's the number 3. It's a whole number. So, what number divided by sixths would give you 3? What number divided by 6 would give you 3? Well, we can write that as a multiplication problem. 6 times 3. Well, what is 6 times 3? Well, if you said 18, you're absolutely correct, which means the fraction in sixths that's equivalent to 3 or equal to 3 is 18/6 because 18 divided by 6 is 3. Now that we have our starting fraction in sixths, we can finish labeling our number line. And we'll just count up. So we start with 18/6. Next would be 19/6, then 20/6, then 21/6, 22/6, 23/6, 24/6, which is the same as 4. And I know that because 24 divided by 6 is 4. So that's in the correct place. Let's keep counting up. Next, we would label 25/6, then 26/6, then 27/6, 28/6, 29/6, then 30/6. And I can check my math because 30 divided by 6 is 5. So I know that 36 is the same as 5. Now, you may want to pause your video to make sure that you have all of your fractions written neatly and they're boxed in so that your paper looks like my screen. Let's take a look at number 3. Number 3 says partition each whole into halves, label each fraction, count up as you go, box the fractions that are located at the same points as whole numbers. Okay, so since we're labeling our number line by halves, the denominator is a 2, so that means that every 2 lines, that would be a whole number. So let's go ahead and partition this number line correctly. So 1, 2. Yep, every 2 lines is a whole number, so I'm doing that correctly so far. 1, 2. 1, 2. All right, now make sure you have your number line partitioned correctly like mine. And now we need to figure out what fraction to start our number line with, because our number line starts with the whole number 4. So let's use our formula, use our math, to figure out what fraction we should start our number line with. Okay, so what number divided by 2 would give you 4? Now I can think about this as a multiplication problem and say 2 times 4 equals what number? Or 4 times 2 equals what number? So what is 2 times 4 or 4 times 2? What's the answer? Well, if you said 8, you're absolutely correct, which means that 8 halves is the same as 4 because 8 divided by 2 is 4. So now I have the first fraction on my number line. And I can finish labeling because all I have to do is count up. So I start with 8 halves. The next fraction would be 9 halves. After 9 halves would be 10 halves. After 10 halves would be 11 halves. After 11 halves would be 12 halves. And notice I'm boxing in the whole numbers and the fraction that represent the whole numbers, just like the directions tell me to. I'm going to write the whole number, or the fraction that represents the whole number, above it also. Now, after 12 halves would be 13 halves. And after 13 halves would be 14 halves. And we're going to box in the whole number and the fraction that represents the whole number, and then write the fraction above the whole number also. So right now, your paper should look like my screen. And if you need to pause your video to make sure that it does, go ahead and do so now. Now let's take a look at number 4. Number 4 says to draw a number line with endpoints 0 and 3. Label the holes. Partition each hole into fifths. Label all the fractions from 0 to 3. Box the fractions that are located at the same points as whole numbers. Use a separate paper if you need more space. All right, well, let's get started. First, we need to draw a number line. So let's draw a long line. And it said we need to have endpoints 0 and 3. So on one end, we need the number 0. And on the other end, we need the number 3 because that's what it means, endpoints of 0 and 3. That means at the ends, there's a 0 on one end and a 3 on the other end. Now, it says partition the holes into fifths. So if we're partitioning into fifths, that means that every fifth line is a whole number. So let's go ahead and start partitioning. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I made that line really long because that long line means I need to write a whole number there when we start labeling. And let's keep partitioning. That's the number 1. So write the number 1 there. Okay, that's the whole number that's there. All right, now let's draw another 5 lines. And remember, at that fifth line, that's a whole number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so remember, every fifth line is a whole number. So that means that this should be the whole number 2. Now let's keep partitioning. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we already wrote the whole number 3 right there. All right, now we have all of our whole numbers listed now. And we have our number line partitioned correctly into fifths. Now we're going to label our fractions. The good thing about this number line is it starts with 0. So we know we can start with 0 thirds, 0 fifths. Made a mistake there, 0 fifths. So we can start with 0 fifths and count up. So 1 fifth, 2 fifths, 3 fifths, 4 fifths. Underneath the number 1, we're going to write 5 fifths, and then we're going to box it in. Big box around it. Now we're going to keep counting up. 6 fifths, 7 fifths, 8 fifths, 9 fifths, and underneath the number 2, we're going to write 10 fifths and box it in. And again, we can check our math. 10 divided by 5 is 2, so we know that we have 10 fifths written under the correct whole number. Now, when you're writing your fractions, make sure to box them in because the numbers can start to look kind of jumbled up on your paper if you're not boxing in the fractions when you're writing them. So please box them in to make sure that your numbers aren't all crazy looking. All right, let's keep counting up. So 10 fifths, 11 fifths, 12 fifths, 13 fifths, 14 fifths, and underneath the number 3, you're going to write 15 fifths, and then make sure to box it all in. Now, we can check our math yet again because 15 divided by 5 is 3. So we know that we have the fraction 15 fifths written under the correct whole number. Now, at this point, you might want to pause your video to make sure that your number line of fifths looks like my number line of fifths. And make sure that your whole numbers and the fractions that represent them have big boxes around them. So go ahead and take a look at your homework, look at my screen, make sure everything matches, and you may want to pause your video now to do that. Congratulations! Lesson 17 homework is complete. As always, I hope this video has helped you to complete your homework correctly and to understand Lesson 17 a little bit better. I hope you have a great rest of your evening or day whenever you're watching this video. And as always, when you're doing math, make sure to check your work just so that you can be sure your math is mathing. And until next time, this is Miss Jones saying bye.